am for another little ramble. Today I'm just going to talk about the R word, or retard. You know, when I was a child, there's certain words that, kids throw around in playgrounds and things like that that are now considered offensive. They were offensive back then, but really we didn't know any better then. So what do we do about these things? You forever seen people up in arms, finding things offensive, and other people saying, "Oh, they're overreacting." But just because we do not understand why somebody is offended by something does not mean it's not offensive. Racial stereotypes, sexual stereotypes, homophobic remarks of all over the past sort of 20, 30 years have been reduced, become accepted as offensive. People have realised how offensive they can be to people. How they relate to people. People with disabilities are at the end of the queue when it comes to being treated with the same respect as other minorities. In some ways, they're almost like sometimes it feels like they're the lost minority. They're the people that people don't seem to worry about offending as much. That's how it's believed to me. I'll tell you where I'm coming from. My wife has a disability. She's also long-term sick. I have worked in the healthcare field for a long time. I no longer do that because I look after my wife. My sister has worked with those with disabilities, both mental and physical, for many years, and I can remember many times of her coming home and talking about that. This is all from, sort of the mid-80s. So I've got quite a bit of experience in the field. I myself have dealt working in healthcare with people with disabilities, both mental and physical. So I think I have quite a bit of experience in this field. And with my wife, we've had times when, yes, we've been discriminated upon, or people have talked down to her, or avoided, not talk to her, talk to me instead of her, because people ignore her, or they've said terms and things that we've found offensive. Since the internet has become big, social media has become big, more terms are flown around. There's certain terms that you suddenly think, let me take the word handicapped. As far as I can understand, it's used far more in America than it is in the UK. In the UK, that term for at least 15, 20 years is deemed as offensive. I could explain to you why that term is deemed as quite offensive over here. It's basically because you're saying somebody is their disability, not they have one. That's why a lot of people with disabilities find the term handicapped quite offensive. But the word retard seems to come around more. When I was a kid, that word never was thrown around. To me, it's always been quite an offensive terminology. But what I've noticed is on the internet, it seems to come around more. I don't know what it seems to. I thought it had come from America a lot, because I've seen a lot of American YouTubers, people on social media use it a lot. I did a bit of research and realized that in America, people find it offensive too, but it just seems to people just throw it around without the thought of why this is an offensive term. But it seems to become more common. I'd say in the past 3 or 4 years, and even in the past 3 or 4 weeks, I've seen that term thrown around a lot more by people really who should know better. People who you think they know about social justice and about things that affect minority groups, but they have still seen that term used. And it's really weird that people don't realize that this is a very offensive term. So the question is, why is it offensive? The term mental retardation is actually a medical terminology. It's almost used to be the word spastic was an insult. It was thrown around a lot. There used to be the Spastic Society in the UK, but because it was used as an offensive way, that term has come out of use. It's still generally used in the medical field, but not much. Mental retardation, in all my years in the healthcare field, I've only ever heard it used a couple of times, but it is technically a medical term. It's just those who haven't developed mentally. Mental retardation as a medical terminology is a developmental issue. It is how biologically a person has developed. It has no moral value on it. So if you call somebody a retard, you're doing it to put somebody down. So if you knew somebody who was an amputee, would you use that terminology in the same term? So as somebody would be called a retard, would you call somebody, oh, you're an amputee, because you're looking down on that person for what they have, an issue they may have. So say you had a TV program. I've heard people say, oh, that TV program or that documentary, that was retarded. So you're using it as an insult. So would you say that, oh, that TV program is a bit like an amputee? When you put it like that, you see that it's wrong. As I said earlier, just because you don't necessarily see this as an offensive terminology does not mean it's offensive. Or it may not be to somebody obvious. I've known of people who've heard the term. I actually had a friend who had heard the term, got really upset because somebody had used the term, because they had a cousin who had Down syndrome. So basically the person was using the term to point out that somebody was worthless, as they had agreed to. So in some ways they were pointing out that their cousin was a worthless person as well. I've seen many times when I've seen recently, you know, YouTubers, people on Facebook use the term. It just seems to have reappeared suddenly. And these are people who wouldn't use the N word and they wouldn't use homophobic slurs, but they're quite happy to use the term retard, which is a slur against those with disabilities. Okay, in my research for this, there was an article in 2013 New York Times. I'll put a link to it just below there, and I'll link you to it. But it was quite an interesting one. I just want to read you about a day when they were trying to bring people's attention of the word and why it was wrong. It was called, this campaign was called Spread the Word to End the Words. And there was a great bit in this piece by a gentleman called John Franklin Stevens, man from Virginia, who has Down syndrome. And this was some of his thoughts on it. Now, the hardest thing about having an intellectual disability is the loneliness. We're aware that all the rest of you stop and just look at us. We're aware that when you look at us and just say, uh-huh, and then move on talking to each other, you mean no harm, but you have no idea how alone we feel, even when we are with you. So what's wrong with retard? I can only tell you what it means to me, and people like me when we hear it. It means the rest of you are excluding us from your group. We are something that is not like you and something that none of you would ever want to be. We are something outside the in-group. We are someone that is not your kind. That is from somebody who this term affects directly and what they feel about it. So before you use words like retard or any other term, have a think about it. I said you may not personally understand why it's an offensive, but it does not mean it's offensive, and it could affect a lot of people. I hope I've managed to explain myself reasonably well. I said I've only just recently started doing a few little videos like this. I've got a couple more coming up in the next couple of weeks. So.